Good morning, everyone. So I think we've got you all coming in now. Welcome to this morning's webinar, which is on holding difficult conversations with your parents. So running a little bit differently to our usual webinars, which are much more focused on some facts and giving some information over to you. Having conversations with our family members is something that's been coming up more and more with the advisors, and something we've been seeing more and more in our meetings, and the importance of those conversations in our meetings. So we wanted to host a webinar to really give some information over to you about how to have conversations, who to have them with, what info we're going to need to gather, and how we can help really as well. So today you've got myself, Grace Keppel, and Tim Rampton. So we're both part of New Forest Wealth Management. I'm an advisor. Tim looks after the advisors here, but we're both going to have a bit of a conversation around this topic, bringing our own experience into it, and then have some space for some questions at the end. So all the advisors are actually on this call as well, so some faces that you are going to recognize here. And they're watching the chat boxes, looking at the questions. We're also reviewing it, so if there's something that comes up that we can answer, we'll do so at the end of the webinar. But if there's things specific to your situation or your families and conversations you're having, then the advisors can all pick up with you after as well. So to start with, really, we wanted to talk about who are these conversations going to be between. So they're not only upwards, children to parents, although that was the topic and the title of this webinar. We're also having conversations downwards. So you might be a parent and you have your own children, adult children, albeit, and you're looking at your own financial situation and saying, what are they going to need to know to best look after me? Or what are they going to need to understand about the way that I've set my finances up? And also, what do I need to understand about how they've set their finances up, so that we can be doing things collaboratively rather than individually. We've also got grandparents on here as well. So these intergenerational planning is becoming more and more important as we all kind of live longer and see more of the generations through. So maybe talking to your grandchildren about their planning rather than just your children. So it's not just a simple, I'm a child with parents that are aging, what do I need to talk to them about? That's a large part of it, but there's all of these different conversations going on as well. So we're only going to keep you for really around half an hour, but we're going to talk about not just facts and info, but the conversations to have, when to have them, what info you need to gather. So what questions are you going to need to ask, and then how to ask them in a way that's sensitive to people's backgrounds. And then we're also going to touch on, of course, how the advisor can help facilitate these conversations, talk to different family members, bring in some objectivity, and also bring in some of the facts as well to help. Things like inheritance tax planning and things are quite technical areas, wills and estate planning as well. You're going to need some real facts in there, and everyone needs to understand the rules so that we can best prepare everyone.
Okay, my turn to say good morning. So good morning to those people I've met before. Good morning if I've never met you before. As Grace says, I'm not an advisor anymore. I've done all that over the last 40 years or so. So I'm not saying that to impress you, but to impress upon you that there's probably not a lot that I haven't come across over that period of time. As Grace has said, there's all the different intergenerational things we can talk about, and most people would start with, well, what am I doing with my parents? If you're a quote child, even I'm still a child to my parents when they're around. But I've always worked on the basis of 4 simple questions, and I just wanted to give you that basis to work on, and also encourage you to do the hardest work of all, which is to think a little bit, to think about the answers to these questions. And I'll sort of bring it to life with a straightforward example of how I use these questions on a day-to-day basis. So the first of the 4 key questions is, where are you now? And I'll give you what sounds like a daft example, but it'll kind of bring it to life. So right now I'm near Portsmouth. And let's say I need to get to New Forest Wealth Management. So that's where I want to be. So I know where I am quite clearly. I know where I want to get to. Then the problems come up. What are the different ways of getting there? And somebody's going to say, well, obviously you're going to jump in the car and go on the motorway. Well, that is an obvious way to do it, but I have been daft enough to cycle to the New Forest. You could go by any other means of transport. And right now, not many people who are saying they're going to go down the M27 in rush hour. So there's different ways of getting there. So for me, it's what's the best way right now. And that will be different for me. It would be different for you. It will also be different depending on what time it is. And in 5 years' time, when somebody looks at my calendar and says, why on earth didn't you go on the motorway? It's because right now the choices were limited and choices gave me different options. So if I go back to the situation with probably every client I've ever sat with, asking somebody where they are right now, sometimes saying, how did you get here? Then again, where do you want to be? Sometimes that's an issue because people have never really thought it through. They might say, I want to retire at a particular age. That might just be state retirement age. They've never actually thought where they would want to be. And again, what are the different ways of getting there? Lots of the different ways we'll all be familiar with. Sometimes there are different options that you're not familiar with, which may or may not be appropriate to you, but you still need to know about them. And again, what's the best way for you right now? So the last real example is for you on the call right now. I don't know what your situation is. I don't know whether you're a grandparent, a parent, a quote child, a grandchild. But as Grace has already said, it's important that you think about these questions and these problems and solutions we're going to talk about in terms of all the different generations. So, where are you right now? Give some thought as to about what your actual situation is. And if any of the circumstances crop up for you that we're going to talk about, that's when you're really going to understand where you are right now. And then where do you want to be, which is probably going to be in a more comfortable place than you are right now, with knowledge, with information, with the ability to solve any problems that crop up. Different ways of getting there. There'll be some things that are going to crop up today that you weren't aware that are necessary to understand. And then clearly, well, how are we going to deal with those issues? So the different ways of getting there. And again, what's the best way for you right now? I suppose the where are you now thing, it's brought to life for me, particularly in dealing with the older generation. I've always dealt with that older generation, which I'm now part of. And over the years, I've had numerous men and women in my office in tears because mum or dad went into care a couple of days ago, and all of a sudden they're looking at this situation and saying, I don't know what to do. And my question, however I put it bluntly or with a bit more delicacy, is fundamentally, where are you right now? And that means, where are you in terms of understanding, for example, what your parents' income is? And bear in mind, if you're the parent or the grandparent, will your children or grandchildren know what your income is, what it is, where it's coming from? What assets do you get? Have you got? Quite often, I think about my own situation. Obviously, I knew my parents had a house. I knew vaguely what the value was. But if we hadn't done what we'd done, I wouldn't have known what other assets there were, what other investments there were around, and so on. Are there advisors in place? Not just financial advisors, but other accountants who might have information, who might have some guidance. Are there solicitors involved for whatever reason? What state benefits are in place at the moment? If we go back to talking about the older generation, people who may be heading towards care of some description, are they claiming, or are they even aware of attendance allowance, for example? Do they know there's two different levels of that? How would any benefits they've got be affected by anything else that's happening to them? One of the really crucial things is, how do people deal with wills? By saying that, one of the key things is, are there wills in existence? And if you don't actually know whether your parents have got wills, I know it's very difficult to ask, because at some point it's going to be going through your mind, are they thinking I'm only asking because I want to know what I'm going to get? But are wills in place? Who are the executors of those wills? Could those executors be you? Because wills are set up without the executors necessarily being told. And the first thing somebody finds out is they're executor of a will they've never seen, and they're not sure of their responsibilities. The other thing is, of course, I've quite often said to people, so have your parents got wills? Yes. Do you know where they are? No. So you might want to take advantage of the storage facilities that Heritage Will Writing have, for example. Are there powers of attorney in place? What sort of powers of attorney? Are they the old enduring powers of attorney? Have they got both the lasting powers of attorneys in place? Who are the attorneys? If they haven't got those in place, have they got capacity to make those, set them up in the first place? Have they got the capacity to change them if they need to? So quite a lot of information that's there, some of which people will think, yeah, I know about that. But just one example I was talking to my son about this morning. He was jumping on his phone. He's just gone up to London and he was paying for his ticket online on his iPhone and going to his Starling and Monzo accounts and those sort of things. There's no physical evidence of those accounts at all. It's all online. If something happened to my son today, God forbid, I haven't got access to his account through his phone. I wouldn't even know he had that account. And that's why there's lots of dormant accounts sat around, never being claimed. So there's a huge gap between where we are now and where we'd like to be sometimes. So the bit about where you want to be, just as an example, I suppose, where would you want to be in the event of care needs? And that's, if you're the person who's like me, that's going to be one of the next considerations for me and my wife in our lives. If we needed care, where would we want that to be? But do the children know what I want, what we would like? Would I want care at home? If I wanted care at home, would I be able to have care at home? Is it big enough? If I needed live-in carers, is there space for people to come in? Is that something that I'd be comfortable with? Is that something that you as the quotes children would be comfortable with? How would you find those carers? If a care home's a requirement, what type of care home? What sort of facilities? Not just the rooms, but do they do group activities? Do they do trips out? Is it local to you? Does it need to be local to you? And do they have the facilities to look after somebody if somebody's situation deteriorates? For example, they might need to move from a care home to a nursing home if they're already maybe suffering from dementia or something like that. Then you may need to consider a care home that can cope with that, or going straight to a nursing home. So there's a huge amount of information there. I think just to give you a real example, I've always said that I had a fairly straightforward situation. There was me, my parents, and my sister, kind of the archetype or old-fashioned family. My sister was in Australia, my parents were in Spain. That adds its own complications with different tax laws, different culture as well. In Spain, they don't have care homes, for example, apart from the expats. People go back to their families again. But all of these considerations, when you've got a few thousand miles between you, mean it's quite difficult to look at those things. And my mother was the sort of person who wrote everything down. So I had everything written down for me, what they actually wanted, but still difficult to put it into place. I'm going to bring up the next words on here because I'm used to talking about it. I know it's maybe emotional subject for some people. For some people, they never want to think about it. But the reality is we do have to talk about death. And where do I want to be if I die? Literally, do I want to be cremated or do I want to be buried? What do I want as a service if I want a service? What do I want happened to all the different things? So those are the sorts of things that we need to be aware of. And it's very difficult to have those conversations sometimes, maybe because we can't deal with the conversations ourselves. Maybe it's at the risk of upsetting somebody else, or we think we're going to upset somebody else. So we can talk a little bit more about how those questions can be raised and then answered. So Grace.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the different ways of getting to that place. And I thought we'd put some time aside really to talk about gifting. And when we think about gifting, there's two main types of gifts that we can leave. We can leave lifetime gifts. So we can give anyone we want to whatever we want, various different tax consequences, et cetera, to all of that. But lifetime gifts here and doing that in the right way, and gifts in the will. Gifts through the will, so writing a will in the right way to leave the gifts in the way that you want to leave them through your legacy. So lifetime gifts and doing those in the most effective way. We've got trusts and access to trusts which both protect yourself and they might also protect the people that you're gifting money to as well. So lots of you on here, if you are St James's Place's clients and you have retirement accounts, might have set up a legacy preservation trust, an asset preservation trust to hold your pension benefits if something happened to you, which is a very simple way, but something that so many people wouldn't be doing if they weren't receiving advice, way to hold your pension benefits to protect your children and the people you're leaving the pension to. But there are other trusts, of course, that you can use, and maybe a trust might not be applicable to your circumstances. So looking at what you're wanting to achieve, whether you're wanting to have money available for the family or be able to have access to the capital of money you're gifting away, whether you want to have an income from a gift that you're giving away to people, trust can be a very effective way to look after your own interests whilst also looking after your various different family members as well, and those people that you want to be leaving money to. Saying that though, it's important that if you are having a trust, then all the people involved know their responsibilities, are looking after the money in the right way. The trustees understand their roles and responsibilities. The beneficiaries understand what they're entitled to. And you understand the limitations that trusts have and gifting trusts have too. Then we've got to look at stocks or cash. So you might have a share portfolio or an investment bond or whatever it might be that you've got set up that you would like to give or gift to someone else. The tax consequence of those investments and how they're arranged might work for you and your circumstances, but they might be the total wrong thing to do for the person you're gifting it to. So you could give a gift that could have tax implications for the person receiving it. And that's, I mean, it could be fairly simple to solve, but it could also be costly to solve, or it could have tax consequences that are unchangeable, tax liabilities for the receiver. So looking at the different ways and the different options that you have for gifting is really important, particularly in or in your lifetime especially. And then looking at the property as well, and I do want to talk about this because it comes up so often when writing wills or talking to people about their estate in general. The property being often the main kind of asset in for a family, and whether people want to protect that house and leave it as a home for the family or whether they don't, is something that we see come up quite often, in that people are trying to protect their home and make sure that it gets passed on to whoever it might be in the will, or even in a lifetime, gifting houses to people's children and family members in a lifetime as well. And making sure that whatever the outcome is that you're looking for, involving all the different people in that conversation is really important. And just making sure that we're doing things in the right way regarding the property and the house. Because there's a lot of advice on there, especially on the internet, that could be misleading. And then the next point is really, does the receiver of the gift need a gift? Do they want a gift? We're talking more in the will in this instance. So someone could be gifted money or assets through the will that actually disrupts their financial situation. Could it be best to leave it into trust? Could it be best to leave it skipping a generation and straight to grandchildren or great-grandchildren? Is a conversation, a good conversation to have. I mean, we all really want to receive gifts, financial gifts especially, but it might not be the most effective way to manage it for tax, really. And there are also risks as well involved in gifting. So the risk of separation or divorce or bankruptcy as well are all there. And there are ways, like simple ways to protect the money that you're gifting from those circumstances. But again, it's something to consider. And when gifting in the will can be written in a way to put all this protection in place when gifting. So having a proper will writer or a solicitor take a look at your will that you have. And if you are receiving, or if you're written into someone's will as a beneficiary, making sure you have a will as well that's written according to your wishes. Because at any point in time, really, you could then inherit and receive funds, and something could happen to you very quickly after. So we just want to make sure that everything is written in the best possible way. So having a will for yourself as well is really, really important. And then finally, I wanted to touch on gifting upwards. So gifting to a parent or a grandparent, and making sure that you're protected as well against the different risks involved. So sometimes we'll see gifts upwards to pay off part of a mortgage, or whatever it might be, and then you'll expect to get it back in the will. Or that's the expectation. But there are risks of paying for long-term care, or other things that parents might face that diminishes the estate, which will mean that you might not get that back. So looking at giving those gifts in a way that you can protect yourself is also important. We're doing another webinar on long-term care in September, which I'm also hosting. So I won't go into it much more there, but just something to be aware of. So that's gifting. But then looking at the different ways of having these conversations, and getting all the information you need, raising all the points, is basically how do we get to a point of understanding what not only you want, but also your family want and need. And I mean, this is going to be different. Having these conversations will be different for each family. But I suppose the one thing we see is that it's a difficult conversation for every family. There are ways to make it easier. You know the emotional side of the family, you know people's backgrounds, and the advisors know the facts and can bring the objectivity. So quite often together, when armed with both of those two different factors, it can work quite well and quite harmoniously. But it's just important to remember that every single person has had a different upbringing, relationship with money and past. I mean, my background's in anthropology, not finance at all. So looking at these sorts of things in conversation, I find really important when talking to people, even about things simple as simple kind of investment things. But looking at all the differences that are going to come up with your family and making sure the advisor knows. So if you're going to go into a conversation, saying and briefing and prepping and having a conversation beforehand will be very important. There are also another part to this, which is often a family might have a plan. So you could go up, talking to family members and they say, nope, got it all in place. This is the plan. And quite often the plan involves a very certain or specific turn of events. So husband and wife, the husband goes first, the husband's prepared X, Y, Z for the wife. But then if that doesn't happen, if something else happens, where are they left? Is everything prepared for circumstances that aren't the ideal situation that we would have had laid out for us? So getting help in those circumstances as well to make sure you're asking the full picture of the question is really important. So again, having the objective view of the advisor to say, okay, thank you for bringing that up, but what happens if the alternative takes place? And again, actually something else quite often we'll see one member of the couple having all the knowledge and all the background of the finances and making sure that everyone, both of them know and understand it. I mean, that's the advisor's job really, to make sure that both parties understand and know. And it's also important for other members of family to understand and know as well, so they can support someone that is left on their own trying to manage all the finances. So always bringing help in, I think is a really great idea. I mean, we do it so often with people, and it genuinely is really that piece around protecting the family. And honestly, we do it because we genuinely care, but important. And then what are the things that you can do right now? So I would always suggest starting, and Tim spoke about this at the start, but think about your own circumstance. So whichever kind of part of this conversation you fall into, knowing and understanding what you would like to have happen, whether you are the kind of like the adult child of parents, whether you're the parents, what would you like your gifts to do? Who would you like to benefit from them? What would you like to have happen for you from a care point of view? Or if you're an adult child, how would you like to receive anything? What are the things you would like to have happen? So that when you go to this conversation and you inevitably get the same questions back, you have a bit of an answer for them as well, and you've thought about your own position. The will as well is probably the simplest, well, not the simplest, but something you could do today to really make a huge difference. Writing one if there isn't one, making sure everyone writes one, and then knowing where it is, knowing the executors know that they're executors. If you're an executor of a will, understanding what the will says, knowing what that means, knowing your responsibilities, knowing your options for going through probate, and all of that. And then planning for unforeseen events, unavoidable situations, which we're talking about there. What happens if the plan doesn't go to plan? So divorce, death, disaster, illness, sickness. Do we have plans for all of those uncertainties and the things that can crop up? And that's really, it's often more thought than action. It's the thought around, if this happens, do we have a plan? Are we going to be okay? If the answer is no, we don't have a plan, and no, we aren't going to be okay, then maybe we can do some action. We can take a look at the options. But just thinking through the different scenarios is something to do right now. Another point here, I know Tim brought it up earlier, but looking at your digital legacy right now. So thinking through what accounts have I got online, social media accounts, photos and albums that you may have stored on, Google Photos or whatever it is. Do people know they're there? Do they know how to access them? What bank accounts have you got online? Portfolios that you've got online? And also what clubs or societies you're involved in. Are you a trustee of any charities or trusts yourself? Do people know about that? So they know if you something happens to you, you get sick, lose capacity, you pass away, that all the right people can be told and filled in. And then finally, I would just make sure that when you've gathered this information, it is in a place that people know about. So a folder or a file with the information in. It doesn't have to be lengthy, just a list of accounts, just a list of plan numbers, or this is how my life looks, how my life is set up. We use something called My Documents, which I find so useful, but you can have it and really arrange it in any way that you would like to. But if you want the My Documents kind of template, then we can, of course, pass that over to you.
So this is all well and good, but it's still a really difficult thing to do, is to ask family members questions sometimes. Even for me over the years, it was much easier to talk to clients rather than the family sometimes. But just some examples now of the sorts of, if you like, open questions that we can ask, and to give you some examples. And bear in mind, you don't have to ask these questions necessarily yourself. The advisor can ask for you, they can be alongside you to help you as well. But just as simple as, can we talk about what to do, what do you want if? And that, easy example is medical situation. If something happened, accident, illness, serious illness, whatever, if you're in hospital, can we just talk about what you actually want? Because they may not have thought about it. And if they have thought about it and haven't told you, that's not a lot of help. What would you like to happen if? And again, thinking about an easy option, what would you like to happen if you needed care? I mentioned earlier on, do you want care at home? Are you not bothered about being at home? Would you be quite like the company in a care home? What would you actually like to happen? That could open up all sorts of different avenues. How would you like us to help you if, and I can give you a specific example of that. I remember saying to my dad when he was still alive, how would you like to help me with your finances? Because he was really struggling towards the end. He was the sort of person who had all of his investments on a spreadsheet, and he was on his little laptop in Spain, checking those things fairly regularly, and then printing the spreadsheet out so he could show me the Excel when I got there. And then it became, I was looking at the Excel spreadsheet he printed off 3 months before, which had pencil marks all over it, and he wasn't really keeping on top of it. So me saying, how would you like me to help you with this, was his opportunity to say, I'm really not that interested in it anymore. I can't be bothered with it. Can you just take it on and you look after it, because he didn't want to do it anymore. The real classic, just to labour the point again, both Grace and I have said it, where will I be able to find this will that you've written? Where will I be able to find the lasting powers of attorney so that I can actually provide the help and support that you want me to provide for you? Where will I be able to find the passwords for all the online stuff and so on? Grace mentioned that the photographs there, and we quite often talk about the money. I mentioned the online bank accounts and so on, but there's so much stuff now that's digitally protected that it's a real struggle to get access to. And even when you think you've got all the things in place with a power of attorney, for example, you still need to go to the institution and register there and go through a whole process. And it's not a question of just walking into the bank and doing it. They'll make you make an appointment and waste a lot of time doing it. So being able to know how the help is required and where you can find the right documents is really important. This is where we've been asked some of the questions both before and during the webinar. I know, Grace, I know you've got one already to talk about. So.
Yeah, no, we had a question come through about sibling, how to engage multiple siblings in the conversation as well. I mean, this comes up a lot because different siblings have different interests. They have different relationships with the family members, and there's often a complicated dynamic in all families, really. I was speaking to someone, rang up the office just yesterday, and she wanted help with her parents' situation. When we spoke to her for a little longer, there was 5 different siblings, one of which lived with her elderly parents. She was no paying rent, and there was some build up there of some kind of energy or resentments. And she's not the executor of a will, but she has power of attorney. So there's different siblings, 5 of them in total, all with different roles and responsibilities. And my question was, why are you the one that's picking up the phone talking about their situation? And she said, I'm the one most worried about it, and I'm the one most concerned. And having those different roles and responsibilities between siblings can be quite a strain. So it can feel like a large responsibility if you feel like you're doing more to help than the others. And that comes naturally. With different people's perception or care or need to want to be engaged. But making sure the siblings are all informed and understand what's going on, particularly the reasons for doing things. So with your will, however you want to involve different siblings or your children, and whatever way that you want to involve them, that's your choice. That really is. But making sure that everyone understands and knows your reasons can be an incredible emotional relief for everyone. And we see that written in letter of wishes, which accompany trust documents or accompanying the will, why you have done certain things and made certain decisions. And for siblings that are trying to navigate this together, keeping people informed and understanding why you are doing or not doing certain things is also important. Where we see this done very well and very effectively are group conversations. And that would be the optimum circumstance. So people sitting down together and being able to talk openly to each other about why they're planning in certain ways, making sure that everyone knows that everyone has their say. But we know that that can't always happen. So if it can't happen, making sure there's some sort of paper trail, or the advisor can kind of inform people and fill in any gaps there as well, to make sure that the whole family is involved. But it's a really, really good question, and something that, because it's not as dynamic as a kind of triangular relationship or something like that. There are different parties involved that all have opinions. But when those opinions really take power or force is when people don't understand reasonings or why certain decisions have been made. So hopefully that kind of helps answer that. But of course, you're going to have a personal relationship with your family members, and that will probably be something we'd need to talk about from a specific point of view for navigating.
Okay, in the interest of time, we can't really go through it in great detail, all the questions, but the digital assets things obviously push some buttons with people. So that's something we can give you some help with. Trusts have been mentioned a number of times by Grace's solutions. And on the one hand, they can sound very complicated, but they're actually a fairly straightforward thing to make sure assets are transferred from one place to another in the most efficient way and the most effective way. But it does involve people being appointed as trustees and then taking responsibilities. And I'm dealing with a case with a vulnerable person at the moment where the remaining trustee is standing there looking at me and saying, how did I get myself into this situation? And my guidance isn't as clear as I thought it was, because now I've got to make some decisions. So getting the things set up properly and having somebody walking alongside you is really important in that situation. And indeed the same with wills, where, as I say, quite often we find that parents have appointed their children as executors, haven't necessarily explained that to them, and even if they haven't gone through the will in great detail, and suddenly the executors faced with the situation saying, now I've got to tell these people that they're not going to get what they thought they were going to get, or they are going to get what they thought they were going to get, but with certain conditions attached, or in some cases there isn't the money there to give them the gifts they thought they were going to get. So it's just being aware of those things. And I think that the last thing, which is a really common thing, and Grace has looked at it, if you like, from people helping their parents, if you like, or helping the older generations with money. But very often we get to the point where somebody's been in retirement for a while, they've done all the trips, they've done all the things they want, they're spending a bit more time at home, and they're finding that they've got maybe more income than they need currently, or maybe they've got some assets that they don't think they need at the moment. So can I give some of this away to my children or grandchildren? And the answer to that is yes, of course you can, but whether you should or not is a different discussion. Because if you're going to give it away, you clearly won't have it later on when you might need it. And people will say, I'll be gone by then. Well, nobody knows when that moment is. And people who are in their 80s could still be here in 20 years' time. And that's a long time to have given stuff away early. Particularly when, as Grace has mentioned, that people aren't necessarily in a position to give it back again or to carry on looking after you. So it's a really key area of people gifting money. And of course, in today's economy, there's a lot of talk about parents and grandparents helping their children, grandchildren, maybe to get them to the property ladder and so on. But there's ways to do that to protect all the parties in doing that, and that's a sort of growing industry that's growing up there. So lots of help available for those sort of situations. Grace.
Now we've got the upcoming webinars, really. So I mentioned the long-term care webinar, which I am hosting on Friday the 6th of September. So looking at the rules around long-term care and some things to think about regarding that issue that often we put off thinking about, but really everyone needs to when everyone hits that point in their life where they actually need some care in some form. So I really recommend coming in that just for some education, really. And then in October, we have a market update with Dan Looney, who some of you might have seen before, giving an update on the markets, where we are with investments, coming at it with reference to St James's Place, so portfolios compared to the wider markets. So 2 good webinars for the rest of the year. But thank you again for your time, and see you soon.
Well, I would say, Grace, just to say this, we've recorded this, and an edited version or a compliance version of this will get made available. So you can look at it again if you really are desperate to do that, or if you want to share it with somebody. But also, what we're going to do is send out a summary. And I've tried to design it so that it's the sort of document you can actually have a conversation with your family members around. Say, look, I went on this webinar with these guys the other day. These are some of the things that cropped up, and then you can actually show it rather than have to necessarily raise the subjects yourself. So trying to make it as easy as possible, but the key thing, as we keep on saying, is take some advice from your advisor. That's what they're there for. So
thank you. Thanks very much. See you guys soon.
Bye-bye.